In the heart of 1990s rural Ohio, 45-year-old Amish farmer John Harrison lives a simple, solitary life on his modest farm after losing his wife Sarah to illness 5 years ago. On a bitter winter evening, a stray German shepherd appears at his barn door, desperately seeking shelter. Against his better judgment, John lets the dog in, only to watch in horror as the animal disappears back into the snowstorm and returns dragging a severely injured 10-year-old girl named Diana. What follows is a race against time as John must choose between his community's traditional ways and saving this mysterious child's life. As Diana slowly recovers, dark secrets emerge about how she ended up in the frozen woods. A tale involving an abusive situation, a desperate escape, and the unlikely bond between a girl, a dog, and a grieving farmer who lost his own daughter years ago. The story explores themes of redemption, unexpected family, faith tested by tragedy, and the healing power of love that transcends loss. In the end, John must make the most difficult decision of his life, one that will change 3 souls forever. The wind howled like a wounded animal across the frozen fields of Holmes County, Ohio. John Harrison pulled his black wool coat tighter around his shoulders as he made his way from the main house to the barn, his boots crunching through the fresh layer of snow that had fallen since sunset. At 45 years old, his beard was still more black than gray, but the lines around his eyes told stories of hard winters and harder losses. It was February 1996, and the cold had settled into his bones the way grief had 5 years ago when he'd buried Sarah. The kerosene lamp in his hand cast dancing shadows across the snow, making the familiar path seem strange and unfamiliar. Behind him, the farmhouse stood dark, except for the single window where he'd left a candle burning. A habit Sarah had insisted on, saying it welcomed travelers and reminded them that God's light never went out. John had kept that tradition alive even though no travelers had come down this isolated road in months. The barn door groaned in protest as he pushed it open, the sound nearly lost in the wind's angry chorus. Inside, his 3 horses, Molly, Buck, and the younger mare, Grace, shifted nervously in their stalls. The cows lowed softly, sensing his presence. This evening routine had been his anchor since Sarah passed. These quiet moments with the animals a respite from the emptiness of the house. He was checking Buck's water trough when he heard it. A sound that didn't belong to the night or the storm. A scratching, deliberate and persistent, coming from the barn's main door. John froze, his hand still on the trough's edge. Living alone had made him cautious. The Amish community in Holmes County was peaceful, but the world outside their farms was changing. He'd heard stories from his neighbors about strangers passing through, desperate people doing desperate things. The scratching came again, more urgent this time, followed by a sound that made his heart clench, a whimper, unmistakably canine. He moved toward the door slowly, raising the lamp higher. Through the gap at the bottom, he could see something moving, dark fur matted with snow and ice. "Just a dog," he muttered to himself in Pennsylvania Dutch, the language of his childhood, his mother tongue. But even as he said it, something about the animal's persistence unsettled him. He cracked the door open, and a gust of wind nearly tore it from his hand. In the lamplight, he saw a German shepherd, its coat thick with ice and snow, its brown eyes staring up at him, with an intelligence that seemed almost human. The dog was shivering violently, but it wasn't just the cold. There was something else in those eyes. Desperation, urgency, fear. "Go on," John said firmly, trying to close the door. "Go home." The dog didn't move. Instead it barked, not aggressive, but insistent, and pawed at the doorframe. John's resolve wavered. He thought of his own dog, a mixed breed named Faithful, who died last spring at the age of 16. Sarah had loved that dog, and in his grief, John had sworn he'd never have another. The pain of loss was too much to bear again. But this animal was freezing, possibly dying. "Ach, du lieber Gott," he sighed, stepping aside. "Come in then, but just for tonight." The dog rushed past him, but didn't head for the warmth of the hay or the shelter of the stalls. Instead, it turned immediately and ran back out into the storm. John stood in the doorway, bewildered. "Foolish animal," he called after it. The dog had vanished into the swirling snow, and he was about to close the door when he saw movement again. The German shepherd was coming back, but this time it wasn't alone. John's blood turned to ice as he watched the dog emerge from the darkness, dragging something behind it. No, not something. Someone. In the lamplight he could make the small form of a child, face down in the snow, being pulled by the dog's teeth clenched on the back of her coat. The girl's arms were splayed out, lifeless, leaving drag marks in the fresh powder. "Mein Gott," the words escaped his lips as a prayer and a curse. He set the lamp down and rushed forward, his heart pounding. The dog released its grip as John reached the child, and he turned her over carefully. A little girl, no more than 10 years old, her lips blue with cold, her face so pale it nearly blended with the snow. Her blonde hair was matted with ice, and what looked like blood. She wore only a thin nightgown beneath a torn winter coat, nowhere near enough protection for a night like this. John's hands trembled as he checked for a pulse. For a terrible moment, he felt nothing, and the memory of holding his own daughter Hannah in his arms, 17 years ago, still and cold, threatened to overwhelm him. Then there, faint but present, the girl was alive. "Stay with me, child," he whispered, gathering her into his arms. She was so light, so fragile. "Just stay with me." The dog barked and ran ahead toward the barn, looking back as if to hurry him along. John followed, carrying the girl as carefully as he could through the snow. Once inside, he laid her gently on a pile of fresh hay in an empty stall, his mind racing through what needed to be done. He'd seen hypothermia before in livestock, and once in an Englisher, a non-Amish person, whose car had broken down near their community. The girl needed warmth, and she needed it fast. But there was something else: dark stains on her nightgown, tears in the fabric, blood, he realized with growing horror. She was hurt. The German shepherd sat beside the girl, never taking its eyes off her face, occasionally licking her hand, as if trying to will her back to consciousness. John ran to the barn's storage area, where he kept emergency supplies. His hands found wool blankets, and he rushed back, wrapping the girl carefully, then removing her wet coat and the thin, soaked nightgown beneath, trying to preserve her modesty while knowing that the wet clothes would kill her if left on. He wrapped her in dry blankets, then his own coat, creating a cocoon of warmth. As he worked, he noticed more injuries. Bruises on her arms, old ones yellowing at the edges, and fresh ones, dark purple, scratches across her shoulders, a gash on her forehead that had bled and then frozen. This wasn't just exposure to the cold. Someone had hurt this child. Anger flared in his chest, hot and righteous. John Harrison was a peaceful man, raised in a tradition that turned the other cheek. But looking at this broken little girl, he understood for the first time how a man might be driven to violence. The dog whined, drawing his attention. Its eyes met his, and in them John saw a mirror of his own anguish. "You protected her," he said softly to the animal. "You brought her here." He checked the girl's pulse again, still faint but steady. Her breathing was shallow, but she was breathing. She needed a hospital, needed doctors, but the nearest phone was 2 miles away at the Yoder farm, and the roads would be impassable in this storm. Even if he hitched up the wagon, they'd never make it to town before morning. He would have to trust in God and do what he could here. John built up the fire in the barn's old wood stove, something he rarely used but kept ready for lambing season. As warmth began to spread through the space, he kept the girl covered, monitoring her breathing, occasionally rubbing her hands and feet to encourage circulation, something Sarah had taught him during their years together. The dog never left her side, its body curled protectively around her blanketed form. "What's your name, girl?" John whispered, knowing she couldn't answer. Where did you come from? Who hurt you? The wind rattled the barn walls, and in the distance he thought he heard something else. Maybe voices, maybe just the storm playing tricks. He moved to the door and peered out into the darkness. Nothing but snow and night. When he returned to the girl, he noticed her eyelids fluttering. Her lips moved, forming silent words. He leaned closer. Papa, no, please. John's heart broke. Whatever had happened to this child, it was clear she'd been running from something terrible. Someone terrible. The girl's eyes suddenly flew open. Wide with terror, she screamed. A sound so full of fear and pain that even the horses startled in their stalls. Her small hands pushed against his chest, fighting him with surprising strength for someone so weak. No, please, I'm sorry. I'll be good. I promise I'll be good. Easy, child. Easy, John said, holding his hands up, backing away to give her space. You're safe here. No one's going to hurt you. But she wasn't seeing him. Her eyes were wild, unfocused, looking at ghosts only she could see. She tried to stand, got tangled in the blankets, and fell back onto the hay. The dog immediately moved to her side, licking her face, whining softly. At the dog's touch, something changed. The girl's breathing slowed. Her hands found the animal's fur, and she buried her face in its neck. Max, she whispered. Max found help. Max saved me. Then her eyes found John's face, and for the first time, she seemed to truly see him. The long beard, the simple clothing, the kind eyes creased with concern. Are you an angel? She asked, her voice barely audible. John felt tears prick his eyes. No, child, just a farmer, John Harrison. And you're safe now. I promise you're safe. Diana, she whispered. My name is Diana. Then her eyes rolled back, and she lost consciousness again. John worked through the night, keeping the fire burning, monitoring Diana's condition, and praying the first real prayers he'd offered since Sarah's death. The dog, Max, never left the girl's side, a faithful guardian in the darkness. As dawn began to break, painting the sky in shades of grey and pink, John heard the crunch of wagon wheels on snow. He looked out to see his neighbor Jacob Yoder driving up the road, probably coming to check on him after the storm. But John couldn't let anyone else know about Diana. Not yet, not until he understood what had happened to her. The bruises, the terror in her eyes, the way she'd begged someone, Papa, not to hurt her. If he reported this to the elders, to the community, there would be questions. The English authorities would be involved, and something in his gut told him that might put this child in more danger. He stepped outside, closing the barn door behind him, and walked to meet Jacob. "Good her, Maria, John," Jacob called out, his breath forming clouds in the cold air. "Rough night. Came to see if you needed help with anything." "Good her, Maria," John replied, forcing his voice to remain steady. "I'm fine, Jacob. Thank you for checking." Jacob's eyes narrowed slightly. "You look tired, friend. You feeling all right? Just didn't sleep well. The storm, you know." Jacob nodded, but his gaze drifted to the barn. "Heard you might have a dog. Saw tracks leading here." John's heart hammered in his chest. "Just a stray. Looking for shelter. Sent it on its way this morning." It was a lie. Something John Harrison had never been good at and didn't believe in. But he was protecting a child, and surely God would understand that. Jacob studied him for a long moment, then shrugged. "Well, if you need anything, you know where to find me. Emma's making extra bread today. I'll have her send some over." "That would be kind. Thank you." John watched Jacob's wagon disappear down the road, then hurried back to the barn. Inside, Diana was still unconscious, but breathing more steadily now. Her color had improved slightly, no longer that terrible blue-white, but still far too pale. Max lifted his head as John entered, and the farmer could have sworn he saw gratitude in the dog's eyes. "All right, boy," John said softly, sitting down beside them. You brought her to me. Now I need to figure out what to do with her." He looked at the small girl so vulnerable in the hay and made a decision that would change everything. He would keep her hidden, at least for now. He would help her heal, and then, when she was strong enough, he would learn her story and help her find true safety. Outside, the sun climbed higher, melting the snow and erasing the tracks that had led Diana to his barn. It was as if God himself was giving John time to think, time to plan, time to save this broken child. But he didn't know that in town, 15 miles away, police officers were already searching for a missing girl. He didn't know that a man, Diana's father, was telling a story about his daughter wandering off into the storm, about how he'd searched all night, about how worried he was. He didn't know that evil sometimes wore the mask of a concerned parent. All John knew was that God had placed this child in his care, and he could not fail her. As Diana slept on, unaware of the decision that had been made, John Harrison began to plan. He had food stores in the house, medical supplies from when Sarah was sick, and most importantly, he had time before the spring thaw when neighbors would visit more frequently. He had time to heal a broken child. He had time to learn the truth, and unknown to him, he had very little time before Diana's past came looking for her. Diana didn't wake again until late afternoon. John had spent the hours alternating between watching over her and trying to maintain his normal routine, feeding the animals, collecting eggs, making sure nothing appeared out of the ordinary should another neighbor pass by. But his mind never left the barn, never stopped worrying about the small girl fighting for her life in the hay. Max had barely moved, only leaving Diana's side once to lap water from the bucket John had brought. The dog's loyalty was extraordinary, almost supernatural. John found himself talking to the animal as he worked. "You're a good boy, aren't you? How long have you been protecting her? Where did you come from?" Max's ears would perk up at his voice, but the dog's eyes always returned to Diana's face, watching for any sign of consciousness. When Diana finally stirred, it was with a soft whimper. Her eyelids fluttered, and her small hands reached out, grasping at nothing. John was beside her immediately, kneeling in the hay. "It's all right, child. You're safe. I'm John, remember? This is my barn." Her eyes opened slowly, and this time there was clarity in them. She looked at him, really looked at him, studying his face, as if trying to decide whether to trust what she saw. Her gaze moved to Max, and a tiny tile ghosted across her pale lips. "Max," she whispered, her hand finding the dog's fur. "Yes, Max brought you here," John said gently. "You've been sleeping for many hours. How do you feel?" Diana's face scrunched up as she took inventory of her body. "Everything hurts," she said finally, her voice small and fragile. "My head and my arm, and my back. I know, little one, you're hurt, but you're going to be okay. Can you tell me what happened? How did you end up in the snow?" Fear flashed across her features, and she pulled the blankets tighter around herself. "I can't. He'll find me. He always finds me." "Who will find you?" John asked, though dread was already settling in his stomach like a stone. "My pa," she whispered, and tears began streaming down her cheeks. "Please don't make me go back. Please. I'd rather die in the snow than go back there." The words hit John like a physical blow. He'd suspected abuse, but hearing it from her lips, seeing the absolute terror in her young eyes, it made everything real and immediate and unbearably heavy. "Listen to me, Diana," he said, his voice firm but gentle. "No one is going to make you go anywhere. You're safe here, but I need to understand what happened so I can help you. Can you trust me enough to tell me?" Diana searched his face for a long moment. Finally she nodded, though her entire body was trembling. "He gets angry," she began, her voice barely above a whisper. "My papa, he wasn't always like this. When Mama was alive, he was different. But after she died 2 years ago, he changed. He started drinking the bad water, the kind that makes people mean. Alcohol, John said softly. Yes, and he gets so angry. At first it was just yelling. Then he started hitting, said I looked too much like Mama. Said I reminded him of everything he'd lost. Fresh tears carved paths down her dirty cheeks. I tried to be good. I tried so hard, but nothing was ever right. John's hands clenched into fists. He forced himself to breathe, to remain calm for her sake. What happened last night, Diana? Why were you out in the storm? He came home from the tavern. He was worse than usual. He had this look in his eyes, like he wasn't even seeing me anymore. Like I was something to destroy. Her voice broke. He hit me so hard I fell down the stairs. I think he thought he killed me because he just stood there staring. So I ran. I knew if I didn't run right then, while he was just standing there, I'd never get another chance. And Max? A real smile appeared on her face, though it was sad. Max is my only friend. Papa got him to guard the house, but Max loved me instead. When I ran, Max came with me. We ran through the woods, but I was so tired, and it was so cold. I fell in the snow and couldn't get up. Max tried to pull me, and then I don't remember anymore. Just cold. So much cold. Max brought you to my barn, John said. He saved your life. Diana hugged the dog tightly. He's the only one who ever protected me. John felt his heart breaking and mending at the same time. This child, this precious soul, had known such cruelty, but God had sent her here. To him, there had to be a reason. Diana, I need to ask you something important. Do you know where you are? Do you know about the Amish? She nodded slowly. We lived near the Amish farms. Papa always said you were strange people, but I thought your horses were beautiful. Sometimes I'd watch them from the road. Your father, does he know about this farm? About me? Diana shook her head. I don't think so. We live on the other side of town. I ran into the woods and just kept running. I don't know how far we came. John nodded, thinking quickly. If she'd come from the other side of Millersburg, she could have wandered for miles through the forest before reaching his property. In the storm, it would have been impossible to track. All right, here's what we're going to do. You're going to stay here, in the barn, until you're stronger. I have a small room in the back. We used to store tack there, but it's warm and dry. I'll bring you food and medicine. But Diana, you must stay hidden. No one can know you're here. Not yet. Why? She asked, confusion crossing her features. Won't you get in trouble? Possibly, John admitted, but I'm more worried about you. If we tell the authorities now, they might send you back to your father. Sometimes the English, the non-Amish, they don't always understand. They might think he's changed, that he's sorry, but men like that. He trailed off, not wanting to scare her further. They don't change, Diana finished for him. I know. So we wait, we let you heal, and we figure out how to keep you safe. Do you trust me? Diana looked at him with those wise, wounded eyes that had seen too much for her 10 years. You're the first grown-up who ever asked me that, she said quietly. Yes, I trust you. John felt the weight of that trust settle on his shoulders. He couldn't fail this child. He wouldn't. He spent the next hour making her comfortable in the tack room. It was small, barely 10 feet square, but it had a window that could be covered, a small stove, and most importantly, it was separate from the main barn. If anyone came looking, they wouldn't see her immediately. He brought blankets, a pillow from the house, and a lantern for light. Diana watched him work, Max never leaving her side. Aren't you scared, she asked suddenly, of getting in trouble? John paused in arranging the blankets. When my daughter Hannah died, he said slowly, she was 3 years old. Fever took her in the spring. I held her while she passed, and I prayed to God to take me instead, but he didn't. For years I've wondered why. Why did he let me live when she died? Why did he take my wife too 5 years ago? He turned to look at Diana. Maybe he kept me here for this moment, to help a child who needed help. I'm not scared, Diana. I'm grateful. Tears welled up in Diana's eyes again, but this time they seemed different. Not tears of pain or fear, but of something else. Hope, perhaps. "I wish you were my papa," she whispered. John's throat tightened. "Come now, let's get you settled. Are you hungry?" Diana nodded eagerly. "I haven't eaten since the day before yesterday, I think." "Then I'll bring you some food. But first, let me clean those wounds properly." He retrieved the medical supplies he'd brought from the house. Clean cloths, alcohol for sterilization, bandages and some herbs Sarah had kept for healing. As he gently cleaned the gash on Diana's forehead, she winced, but didn't cry out. "You're very brave," he told her. "No," she said, "I'm just used to it hurting." Those words haunted John as he worked. What kind of world had this child lived in, where pain was so normal she'd become numb to it? The bruises on her arms and shoulders were worse in the daylight, dark purple and black, some yellowing at the edges from previous beatings. He applied salve as gently as he could, all the while silently praying for healing, for her body, yes, but more importantly, for her spirit. When he was done, he helped her into a clean nightshirt, one that had belonged to Sarah. It was far too big, but it was warm and dry. "I'll bring you food now," he said, "and then you need to rest more. Your body needs time to heal." "Will you come back?" Diana asked, a hint of panic in her voice. "Of course, I'll check on you every few hours, and Max will stay with you, won't you, boy?" The dog's tail wagged once, and he settled beside Diana's makeshift bed. John returned to the house, his mind racing. He prepared a simple meal: bread, cheese, apple butter, and some leftover chicken soup. As he worked, he caught himself humming, something he hadn't done since Sarah died. The house felt different somehow, still empty, but not quite as hollow. There was purpose now, a reason to move through the day beyond mere survival. He was carrying the tray of food back to the barn when he saw it. A car on the road, moving slowly. His heart leaped into his throat. Cars were rare on this isolated stretch, especially moving at such a crawl, as if the driver was searching for something, or someone. John forced himself to walk normally, to not run or act suspicious. He entered the barn through the side door, and quickly made his way to Diana's room. "A car's coming," he said quietly. "Stay very still and very quiet. Don't make a sound, no matter what you hear." Diana's eyes went wide with fear. "Is it Papa?" "I don't know, but we're not taking chances. Max, guard." The dog seemed to understand, positioning himself between Diana and the door, his ears alert. John closed the tack room door and moved to the front of the barn, trying to look busy with the horses. Through the gap in the barn door, he watched the car, a battered blue sedan, slow to a stop near his property line. A man got out. He was tall, heavy-set, with a red face and bloodshot eyes. Even from a distance, John could smell the alcohol on him. The man stumbled slightly as he walked toward the barn. "Hey!" he called out. "Hey! You in there?" John stepped out, keeping his expression neutral. "Can I help you?" The man looked him up and down, taking in the Amish clothing, the beard, the simple appearance. His lip curled in something like disgust. "You seen a little girl? Blonde, about this tall?" He held his hand out to indicate Diana's height. "She's my daughter, ran off last night. I'm worried sick." Liar, John thought. This man wasn't worried, he was hunting. "No," John said simply. "I've seen no one." "You sure? She might have come this way. Might be hiding in your barn there." "There's no one in my barn but animals." The man took a step closer, and John smelled the whiskey more strongly now. "You wouldn't lie to me, would you? You religious folk are supposed to be honest." "I am being honest. There is no girl here." It wasn't quite a lie. Diana was in the tack room, technically separate from the main barn. John told himself this justified the deception. The man stared at him for a long moment, his bloodshot eyes narrowed with suspicion. Then he spat in the snow. "If you see her, you tell the police. Name's Robert Winters. My daughter's name is Diana. She's sick in the head, makes up stories, can't trust a word she says. I will inform the authorities if I see anyone," John said evenly, though his insides were churning. Robert Winters glared at him a moment longer, then turned and stumbled back to his car. John watched him drive away, his heart pounding. He waited a full 5 minutes before returning to Diana. She was curled in a ball in the corner, Max pressed against her, her whole body shaking. "It was him," she whispered. "I heard his voice. I know it was him." "He's gone now," John said, kneeling beside her. "And he doesn't know you're here." "He said I was sick in the head," Diana sobbed. "He always says that, says no one will believe me because I'm crazy." John pulled her into his arms, and she collapsed against him, her small body racked with sobs. "You are not crazy," he said firmly. "You are a brave, strong, wonderful child, and I believe every word you say." "He'll come back," she whimpered. "He always comes back. Then we'll be ready. But Diana, he won't find you. I promise you that." He held her until the sobs subsided, until her breathing evened out. When he pulled back, her eyes were red and swollen, but there was determination there too. "What do we do now?" she asked. "Now," John said. "You eat, you rest, you heal, and I start planning." "Planning what?" "How to keep you safe, permanently." As Diana ate her soup, John's mind was already working. He couldn't keep her hidden forever. Eventually someone would find out, but he needed time. Time to build a case. Time to find someone who would listen, someone who would believe a child over her father. He thought of the bishop, Samuel Lapp. Samuel was a good man, wise and compassionate. Perhaps he would understood, but involving the Amish church meant breaking one of their fundamental rules. They didn't involve themselves in English affairs. Then there was the English law. John knew little about it, but he knew that simply hiding a child could get him in serious trouble. Yet sending her back to that monster was unthinkable. As Diana finished her meal and began to drift off to sleep again, exhausted from fear and tears, John made a decision. He would keep her hidden for now, let her heal, and in the meantime he would find a way. He didn't know how yet, but he had faith that God would show him the path. "Mr. John?" Diana's sleepy voice broke through his thoughts. "Yes, child. Thank you for believing me. No one ever has before. Sleep now," he said gently. "You're safe here." As he left the barn and returned to the house, the sun was setting, painting the sky in brilliant oranges and reds. It should have been beautiful, but all John could think about was the man Robert Winters and the evil that could hide behind a father's face. That night, John barely slept. Every sound made him jump. Every creak of the house had him reaching for his boots, ready to run to the barn. He kept seeing Diana's bruises, kept hearing her say she'd rather die than go back. Around midnight he gave up on sleep entirely and sat by the window watching the road. The house was dark except for the single candle in the window, Sarah's tradition welcoming travelers. But tonight, John prayed that no travelers would come. In the barn, Diana slept fitfully, occasionally crying out in her sleep. Max would nuzzle her face, whine softly, and she would calm. The dog was her guardian angel, John thought, a gift from God when she needed it most. As dawn began to break, John made his decision. He would go to Samuel Lapp, the bishop, but he wouldn't tell him about Diana. Not yet. Instead, he would ask hypothetical questions about helping children in danger, about English law, about what a man's duty was when faced with such a choice. Samuel was wise. Perhaps he would know what to do. But as John watched the sunrise paint the sky in shades of pink and gold, he couldn't shake the feeling that time was running out. Robert Winters had been here once. He would likely come back. And next time, he might not be alone. 3 days passed like shadows crossing the barn floor. John fell into a rhythm of deception that felt foreign to his honest nature, caring for Diana in secret while maintaining the appearance of his normal, solitary life. Each morning he would tend to his animals, check the road for any sign of Robert Winters, then slip into the tack room with food, medicine and news of the outside world. Diana was healing, at least physically. The gash on her forehead was closing nicely, the bruises fading from deep purple to yellowish green, but her spirit remained fragile, easily startled by unexpected sounds, plagued by nightmares that had her screaming in her sleep until Max's gentle presence calmed her. On the fourth morning, John made his way to Bishop Samuel Lapp's farm, his heart heavy with the weight of secrets. The February air was crisp and clear, the kind of cold that made breath visible and fingers numb. He drove his buggy slowly, rehearsing what he would say. Samuel's farm was larger than John's, prosperous and well-maintained. Children played in the yard. Samuel had 8, ranging from toddlers to teenagers. The sight of them made John's chest tighten. He thought of Hannah, forever frozen at 3 years old in his memory, and of Diana, hiding in his barn desperately in need of a father who would protect rather than harm. Samuel himself was in the workshop, a tall man with a white beard that reached his chest and eyes that seemed to see through to a person's soul. He looked up from the chair he was repairing as John entered. "John Harrison," he said warmly, setting down his tools. "This is an unexpected visit. What brings you here on this cold morning?" John removed his hat, turning it nervously in his hands. "I need wisdom, Samuel. I need guidance on a matter that troubles my conscience." Samuel's expression grew serious. He gestured to a bench. "Sit, friend. Tell me what burdens your heart." John sat, choosing his words carefully. If a man knew of a child in danger, an English child being hurt by someone who should protect them, what would be his duty? Under our ways, under God's law. Samuel stroked his beard thoughtfully. "This is not a hypothetical question, is it, John?" John met his eyes. "I cannot say more. Not yet, but I need to know what would be the right thing to do." "Our way is non-involvement in English affairs," Samuel said slowly. "We live separate from the world, as commanded." But he paused, his eyes growing distant. "But we are also commanded to love our neighbor, to protect the innocent, to be the hands and feet of God in this world. And if helping meant breaking English law, meant possibly bringing trouble to our community." Samuel was quiet for a long moment. "John, I have known you for 20 years. You are a good man, a righteous man. If you are asking these questions, I trust there is grave need. But I must ask you, are you certain you understand the consequences? The English law is not our law. They do not always understand our ways or our reasons." "I understand," John said quietly. "But Samuel, if you knew a child was suffering, could you turn away, even knowing the cost?" The bishop rose and walked to the window, looking out at his own children playing in the snow. "When my youngest, Rebecca, was born, she was blue, not breathing. The English doctor said there was nothing to be done, but I breathed into her mouth again and again, until she cried. I did not ask permission. I did not wait for someone to tell me it was proper. I simply did what a father must do." He turned back to John. "Sometimes, John, righteousness requires us to act before we have all the answers. But what if there is a woman," Samuel interrupted, "in Millersburg, English, but good. Her name is Margaret Fletcher. She works with children who have been hurt. She understands both English law and the human heart. If you need help with such a matter, she would be the one to speak with." John committed the name to memory. "Thank you, Samuel." "John," the bishop said as he moved toward the door, "whatever you are doing, be careful. And remember, sometimes the right path is not the easy one. Sometimes it is the narrow gate that leads to salvation." As John drove home, his mind was churning. Margaret Fletcher, a woman who helped hurt children. Perhaps she was the answer he'd been praying for. But when he arrived back at his farm, his plans shattered like ice beneath a boot. 2 police cars were parked in his driveway. John's blood turned to water. He forced himself to remain calm as he guided the horse to the barn, his mind racing. Had someone seen him with Diana? Had Robert Winters convinced them to search the property? As he climbed down from the buggy, 2 officers approached. One was older, with grey hair and a weathered face. The other was younger, barely out of his 20s, with eager eyes that darted around the property. "Mr. Harrison?" the older officer asked. "Yes," John replied, his voice steady despite his hammering heart. "I'm Sheriff Tom Brennan. This is Deputy Miller. We're investigating a missing child case. A girl named Diana Winters, age 10. Her father reported her missing 4 days ago. He mentioned he stopped by here, asked if you'd seen her." "I remember," John said carefully. "I told him I had not." "Mind if we look around?" the sheriff asked, though his tone made it clear it wasn't really a question. John's throat went dry. "Do you have a warrant?" Sheriff Brennan's eyes narrowed slightly. "We can get one if we need to, but I'd think a God-fearing man like yourself would want to help find a missing child. Unless there's a reason you don't want us looking around." It was a trap, and John knew it. Refuse, and they'd get a warrant and search anyway, making him look guilty. "Agree, and they might find Diana." "Of course," John said, praying silently. "Though I keep a simple farm, there's not much to see." As the officers began their search, John's mind raced. Diana was in the tack room, a separate space, but still technically part of the barn. If they were thorough. "You live alone out here?" Deputy Miller asked, poking his head into the chicken coop. "Yes. My wife passed 5 years ago." "Lonely life," the deputy observed. "Peaceful," John corrected. Sheriff Brennan was more methodical, checking the house first, then the outbuildings. When he approached the barn, John's heart began to pound so hard he was certain everyone could hear it. "Just animals in here," John said, trying to keep his voice casual. "Horses, cows, some chickens." The sheriff pushed open the barn door. The smell of hay and animals wafted out. Molly whinnied from her stall, and Buck stomped a hoof, nervous at the strangers. John watched as the sheriff walked through, checking each stall. His eyes scanned the walls, the loft, the corners, then his gaze fell on the tack room door. "What's in there?" "Old equipment, harnesses, tools, things like that." "Mind if I look?" "It's locked," John said quickly, then cursed himself internally. Why had he said that? Locked? The sheriff's eyebrows raised. Why lock a tack room? Valuable equipment, sometimes transients pass through. It was a weak excuse, and both men knew it. The sheriff's hand went to the door handle, tested. It was indeed locked. John had done that on the second day, telling Diana it was for her protection. "Mr. Harrison, I'm going to need you to open this door." John's mind went blank. He couldn't think of a single excuse, a single reason to refuse that wouldn't make him look guilty. His hand went to his pocket, where he kept the key. Then from somewhere in the distance came the sound of barking. Not just any barking. Max's distinctive deep bark, urgent and alarmed, but it wasn't coming from inside the tack room. It was coming from outside, from the woods behind the property. All three men turned toward the sound. "That a dog?" Deputy Miller asked. "Stray," John said quickly, seizing on the distraction. "Been hanging around for a few days. Skittish thing. Won't let me near it." The barking continued, growing more frantic. Then they heard it, a child's voice, crying out, "Help! Someone help me!" The sheriff and deputy exchanged glances and took off running toward the sound. John stood frozen for a moment, confused. That wasn't Diana's voice. It was too different, too high-pitched. What was happening? He followed the officers into the woods, his boots crunching through the snow. The barking led them deeper into the trees, until they came to a small clearing. There they found a German shepherd. But it wasn't Max. This dog was younger, lighter in color, and beneath a fallen tree pinned by a heavy branch was a boy, maybe 12 or 13 years old, crying and struggling. "Please, my leg. It's stuck." The officers rushed forward, and together they lifted the branch. The boy scrambled free, crying in pain and relief. His leg was twisted at an odd angle. Broken. John realized. "What's your name, son?" Sheriff Brennan asked gently. Tommy. Tommy Walsh." "I was cutting through the woods, and the tree, it just fell." My dog, he ran for help. The German shepherd was licking the boy's face, whining softly. All right, Tommy, we're going to get you to a hospital. Deputy, call for an ambulance. In the chaos of helping the injured boy, the search of John's property was forgotten. Deputy Miller carried Tommy back toward the police cars while the sheriff radioed for help. John stood in the woods, his heart still racing, trying to understand what had just happened. Was it coincidence, divine intervention? He didn't have answers, but he knew he'd been given a reprieve. By the time the ambulance arrived and Tommy was loaded in, the sheriff seemed to have forgotten all about the locked tack room. As the vehicles pulled away, Sheriff Brennan paused at his car.
Mr. Harrison, thank you for your cooperation. If you see or hear anything about the Winters girl, you'll let us know immediately, won't you? Of course, John said. As the police cars disappeared down the road, John's legs nearly gave out beneath him. He leaned against the barn wall, breathing deeply, offering up a prayer of thanks. When he finally had the strength to move, he unlocked the tack room door. Diana was huddled in the corner. Max pressed against her, her eyes wide with terror. I heard them, she whispered. They were looking for me. They're gone now, John said, kneeling beside her. You're safe, but they'll come back. Papa won't give up. John took her hands in his. Diana, I spoke with our bishop today. He told me about someone who might be able to help. A woman named Margaret Fletcher. She helps children like you. No. Diana pulled her hands away. No one can help. They never believe us. They always send us back. Not this woman. She's different. You don't know that. You're just like all the adults. You'll send me away, and then Papa will. She couldn't finish, dissolving into sobs. John felt helpless. He wanted to comfort her, to promise her that everything would be all right, but he couldn't. The truth was, he didn't know what would happen. He was navigating waters he'd never sailed before, making decisions that could destroy them both. Diana, he said softly, I know you're scared, but we can't hide forever. Eventually someone will find out. And when they do, I want to make sure you're protected. This woman, Margaret Fletcher, at least let me talk to her. Let me see if she can help. Diana looked at him with those wounded eyes. And if she can't, what then? Then we'll find another way. But we have to try something. You understand that, don't you? Slowly, reluctantly, Diana nodded. That evening, after Diana had fallen into an exhausted sleep, John sat at his kitchen table, pen in hand, trying to compose a letter to Margaret Fletcher. How did one explain such a situation in writing? How did he convey the urgency, the danger, the absolute necessity of helping this child? In the end, he wrote simply, Dear Mrs. Fletcher, I am writing to you about a matter of grave importance concerning a child in danger. I was told you help children who have been hurt. I cannot explain more in a letter, but I desperately need your guidance. Please, if you can, come to the Harrison farm on Millers Creek Road. Come alone and come quickly. A child's life may depend on it. John Harrison, he would have Jacob Yuda's oldest son, who sometimes did work for the English, deliver it tomorrow. Margaret Fletcher would receive it by evening. But as John sealed the envelope, doubt gnawed at him. What if she came with the police? What if she didn't believe him? What if she was like all the others? Diana feared. He was placing Diana's life and his own freedom in the hands of a stranger. That night, the nightmares came for Diana worse than ever. John heard her screaming from the house and ran to the barn in his nightclothes, not caring if neighbors saw. He found her thrashing in her sleep, crying out for her mother, begging her father to stop. He woke her gently and she clung to him, sobbing. He was drowning me, she gasped between sobs. In the bathtub, he said I was dirty, that I needed to be cleansed. I couldn't breathe, Mr. John, I couldn't breathe. John held her, his own tears falling into her hair. Did this really happen? She nodded against his chest. 3 months ago, when I spilled milk at breakfast, he held my head under water until I stopped fighting. Then he pulled me up and asked if I'd learnt my lesson. Rage, pure and hot, flooded through John.
He had never felt such anger, such righteous fury. This man, this monster had tortured his own child, and somewhere out there he was searching for her, probably planning what he would do when he found her. "Diana," John said, his voice shaking with emotion, "I promise you on my wife's grave, on my daughter's memory, I will never let him hurt you again. Never. Do you hear me? You can't promise that," she whispered. "No one can. Then I will die trying, because you deserve to be safe. You deserve to be loved, and protected, and cherished. And if this world can't give you that, then there's something terribly wrong with this world." Diana pulled back to look at him. In the lamplight, her face was streaked with tears, but there was something else there too, a tiny spark of hope. "Do you mean that?" Every word. She hugged him again, and John felt something shift in his heart. This child was not his daughter, not by blood, not by law, but in every way that mattered. She was becoming his, and he would protect her with everything he had. The next morning, Jacob Yoda's son, Matthew, arrived to pick up the letter. He was a good boy, 17, who worked odd jobs for the English to save money for his own farm someday. "You want me to deliver this today?" Matthew asked, looking at the address. "As soon as possible. And Matthew, don't mention this to anyone. Not your father, not your friends. This is very important." Matthew's eyes widened with curiosity, but he nodded. "Yes, Mr. Harrison, I'll deliver it myself this afternoon." As Matthew drove away, John felt the die had been cast. There was no going back now. Margaret Fletcher would come, or she wouldn't. She would help, or she wouldn't. But John had done all he could. Now they could only wait. He returned to the barn to tell Diana what he'd done. She received the news with quiet resignation, as if she'd given up hoping for anything different. "When will she come?" Diana asked. "Maybe tomorrow, maybe the day after. And if she doesn't believe me, then we'll figure out something else." But even as he said it, John wondered what else there could be. He was running out of options, running out of time. That afternoon, as he was chopping wood behind the house, he saw another car on the road, this time a battered blue sedan, Robert Winter's, making another pass through the area. The car slowed as it approached the farm, but didn't stop. John watched it continue down the road, his hands clenched tight around the axe handle. The wolf was circling, getting closer. In the barn, Diana had seen the car too. When John checked on her later, he found her in the corner, knees pulled to her chest, rocking back and forth. "He's coming," she whispered. "I know he's coming. Let him come," John said with more confidence than he felt. "He won't find you." But that night, as John lay awake in his bed, he wondered how long they could keep hiding. How long before someone saw something, noticed something? How long before Robert Winters stopped asking politely and started demand? The candle in the window flickered, casting dancing shadows on the walls. Outside, the winter wind howled like a living thing, and in the distance John thought he heard a car engine. Or maybe it was just his imagination, his fear taking shape in the darkness. Either way, he knew their time was running short. Tomorrow, Margaret Fletcher would receive his letter. Tomorrow, everything would change. John just prayed it would change for the better. Margaret Fletcher arrived the following evening, just as the sun was setting behind the bare winter trees. John had been watching the road all day, his nerves stretched taut as wire. When he saw the modest green sedan turn into his drive, his heart began to race. She was alone, thank God for that. A woman in her late 50s stepped out of the car, wrapped in a practical wool coat, her grey hair pulled back in a neat bun. She had the kind of face that had seen much sadness but chose kindness anyway. Lines around her eyes that spoke of both tears shed and smiles given. John met her at the door, his hand unconsciously smoothing his beard, a nervous habit. "Mr. Harrison?" she asked, her voice gentle but firm. "Yes, Mrs. Fletcher. Please call me Margaret." She looked around the property, taking in the simple farm, the barn, the house. "Your letter was concerning. I came as quickly as I could. Thank you for coming, and for coming alone. The boy who delivered your letter said it was urgent, said a child's life was at stake." Her eyes fixed on him, sharp and assessing. "Is that true?" "Yes. Please come inside. I need to explain, and then I need you to meet someone." Inside the warm kitchen, John made tea, a skill Sarah had taught him, saying that difficult conversations were always easier with something warm to hold. Margaret sat at the table, her hands folded, waiting patiently. "I hardly know where to begin," John said, setting the cups down. "Start at the beginning. I've learned that's usually best." So he did. He told her about the storm, about Max appearing at his barn, about the dog dragging Diana through the snow. He told her about the bruises, the terror in the child's eyes, the way she'd begged not to be sent back. He told her about Robert Winters showing up drunk, hunting for his daughter. He told her everything except where Diana was hiding. Not yet. Margaret listened without interrupting, her expression growing graver with each detail. When John finally fell silent, she sat back in her chair, processing what she'd heard. "This is very serious, Mr. Harrison. You understand that you could be charged with kidnapping, with harboring a runaway." "I understand, but what was I supposed to do? Send her back to a man who beats her, who—" He stopped, unable to repeat what Diana had told him about the bathtub. "No," Margaret said firmly. "No, you did the right thing, but we need to be very careful now. The legal system doesn't always work the way it should, especially in cases like this. Diana says no one ever believes her, that adults always send children back." Margaret's jaw tightened. "Unfortunately, she's not wrong. I've worked with abused children for 15 years, Mr. Harrison. I've seen too many sent back to dangerous homes, because the system values keeping families together over keeping children safe. But I've also learned how to work within that system, how to fight for these kids. Can you help her? I need to meet her first. Assess the situation fully." "Where is she?" John hesitated, his protective instincts warring with his need for help. Margaret seemed to understand. "Mr. Harrison, John, I promise you I am on this child's side. Everything you've told me suggests severe abuse, but I need to see her, talk to her, before I can determine the best course of action." After a long moment, John nodded. "She's in the barn, but please go slowly. She's terrified of strangers. It took days before she stopped flinching every time I came near." "I understand. I'll follow your lead." They walked to the barn together, the snow crunching beneath their feet. The temperature was dropping as night fell, and their breath formed clouds in the air. John could see his own anxiety reflected in those small clouds, quick, shallow breaths he couldn't quite control. At the tack room door he knocked gently, something he'd started doing to avoid startling Diana. "Diana, I have someone here to meet you. This is Margaret Fletcher, the woman I told you about." There was silence, then a small voice. "Is she alone?" "Yes, just Margaret, I promise." The door opened a crack, and one blue eye peered out. Max stood beside Diana, his body tense, protective. When the dog saw Margaret, a low growl rumbled in his chest. "It's all right, Max," Diana whispered, but her hand was buried in his fur, gripping tight. Margaret crouched down, making herself smaller, less threatening. "Hello, Diana. My name is Margaret. I'm here to help you, if you'll let me." "That's what they all say," Diana replied, her voice barely audible. "Then they call Papa and tell him to come get me. I'm not going to call your father. I promise you that. Promises don't mean anything." Margaret was quiet for a moment, then said, "You're right. Promises are just words. So, let me tell you what I'm going to do instead. I'm going to listen to you. Really listen. And then I'm going to believe you. And then I'm going to help you be safe. Not because I promise, but because it's the right thing to do." Something in her tone, in the way she spoke to Diana, as an equal rather than a child to be managed, seemed to reach through the girl's defenses. The door opened a little wider. "Can I come in and sit with you for a bit?" Margaret asked. "Just to talk." Diana looked at John, seeking his approval. He nodded encouragingly. "Okay," Diana said finally, stepping back to let Margaret enter. John started to follow, but Margaret held up a hand. "Would it be all right if Diana and I talked alone for a few minutes? Sometimes it's easier for children to open up without someone they're trying to protect, listening." John understood. Diana had been sheltering him from the worst of it. He realized she'd told him enough to explain her fear but had held back the details, perhaps afraid of burdening him, or maybe just unable to speak the worst of it aloud to a man who'd been so kind. "I'll be just outside," he said, looking at Diana. Call if you need me." She nodded, and John stepped out, closing the door behind him. He stood in the barn, listening to the soft murmur of voices. Diana's high and halting, Margaret's low and steady. He couldn't make out the words, but he heard Diana begin to cry, and it took every ounce of his willpower not to burst back in. Max slipped out through the door and sat beside John, as if the dog too needed a break from the pain being shared in that small room. John stroked the animal's head absently, praying silently for wisdom, for help, for salvation. 20 minutes passed. 30. John was beginning to worry when the door finally opened. Margaret's eyes were red, her face pale. She looked like she'd aged 10 years in that small room. "Miss Harrison, could we talk?" "In the house. Is Diana?" "She's all right. She's tired. I think she needs to rest now." John looked past Margaret to see Diana curled up on her makeshift bed, her eyes closed, Max already returning to his post beside her. The girl looked smaller than ever, fragile as spun glass. Back in the kitchen, Margaret sat heavily at the table, her professional composure cracking. She took a long drink of the now cold tea, not seeming to notice the temperature. "That child," she said finally, her voice shaking, "has endured horrors I can barely comprehend. The abuse she's described, Mr. Harrison, we're not just talking about occasional beatings. This is systematic torture." John felt his stomach drop. "Tell me, are you certain you want to know?" "I need to know, to help her. I need to understand what she survived." Margaret took a deep breath. "Robert Winters is a sadist. He doesn't just hit her when he's drunk or angry. He plans it, punishes her for imagined offenses. The incident with the bathtub, that's only one example. He's locked her in closets for days without food. Burned her with cigarettes. Burned her." John felt rage building in his chest. "On her back, where the marks wouldn't show. He's thrown her downstairs, pulled her hair out in clumps." Margaret paused, clearly struggling with what to say next. "There are indications of sexual abuse as well." The room spun. John gripped the edge of the table, bile rising in his throat. "That monster, that absolute monster." "The worst part," Margaret continued, tears now flowing freely down her face, "is that she's tried to tell people. A teacher, a school nurse, even a police officer once. But Robert Winters is well known in town. He's charming when he's sober, active in his church, respected in the community. Every time Diana spoke up, she was called a liar. She was told she was making up stories for attention. One social worker even suggested she was mentally disturbed. So she stopped telling people. She gave up hope that anyone would help her until she ran, until that dog brought her to you. She had accepted that this was her life, that she would either endure it or die trying to escape it." John stood abruptly, pacing the kitchen. "We can't let him take her back. I don't care what the law says. I won't allow it. I agree, but if we're not smart about this, we'll lose her anyway. The system will take her from both of us and put her right back with him. Then what do we do?" Margaret pulled out a notebook. "All business now. First, we document everything. I'll photograph her injuries, the ones visible and the others. We build a case so overwhelming that no one can ignore it. Second, we find allies. I know a judge, Judge Patricia Thornton. She's one of the few who actually listens in cases like this. If we can get Diana's case in front of her, we have a chance. How long will this take? A week, maybe 2, to build a solid case. In the meantime, Diana stays hidden here. Can you manage that? What about the police? They've already been here once looking for her. We'll have to be very careful. If they come back, you'll have to." She paused, choosing her words carefully. "You'll have to continue being economical with the truth." "You mean lie?" "I mean protect a child by any means necessary." John sat back down, his mind reeling. "I've never lied in my life. Not real lies, small omissions perhaps, but nothing like this." "Then think of it this way. You're not lying for yourself. You're protecting an innocent child from a monster." Surely even the Amish can make an exception for that. John thought of Samuel Lapp's words. Sometimes righteousness requires us to act before we have all the answers. All right, he said finally, we do this your way. But Margaret, if anything goes wrong, if they try to take her, we won't let it come to that. But even as she said it, they both knew it was a promise neither could keep. Margaret stayed for another hour, going over the plan in detail. She would return in 2 days with a camera and medical supplies. She would document Diana's injuries and take the girl's full statement on tape. Meanwhile, she would quietly reach out to Judge Thornton, feeling out whether she would be sympathetic to the case. Don't contact anyone else, Margaret warned. The fewer people who know, the better. Robert Winters has friends in this town, and word travels fast. As she prepared to leave, she paused at the door. Mr. Harrison, John, what you're doing is incredibly brave and incredibly dangerous. You could lose everything. I already lost everything when I lost my wife and daughter, John said quietly. Perhaps God kept me here for this, to save the child I couldn't save before. Margaret's eyes filled with tears again. She's very lucky to have found you. No, I'm the lucky one. She's given me a purpose again, a reason to wake up in the morning. After Margaret left, John returned to the barn. Diana was awake, staring at the ceiling, Max's head resting on her stomach. Is she going to help us? Diana asked without looking at him. Yes, she's going to try. I told her everything, Mr. John. Everything Papa did. Things I never told anyone before. Her voice was hollow, empty of emotion. Do you still want me here, now that you know what I am? John knelt beside her, confused. What you are, Diana. You're a brave, strong, wonderful child. I'm dirty, damaged. Papa always said so, said I was ruined, that no one would ever want me, that I was... She choked on the words. Stop. John's voice was firm but gentle. You listen to me, Diana. You are not dirty. You are not damaged. You are not ruined. You are a child who survived things no child should ever face. You are a miracle. Do you understand? A miracle. But the things he did, those things were done to you, not by you. None of it was your fault. None of it makes you less worthy of love or protection or happiness. Diana finally looked at him, tears streaming down her face. Do you really believe that? With all my heart. She sat up and hugged him, fiercely, sobbing into his shoulder. I wish you were my real papa, she whispered. John's heart broke and healed simultaneously. I wish that too, little one. I wish that too. That night, John couldn't sleep. He sat in his kitchen, reading his Bible by candlelight, searching for guidance. His eyes fell on a passage in Matthew. Whoever receives one such child in my name receives me. But whoever causes one of these little ones to sin, it would be better for him to have a great millstone fastened around his neck and to be drowned in the depth of the sea. Strong words, righteous anger from a gentle Savior, protection for the innocent, damnation for those who harmed them. John felt that same righteous anger burning in his chest. If Robert Winters came for Diana, would John be able to stand back and let him take her? Or would he finally, after a lifetime of pacifism, raise his hand in violence? He didn't know the answer, and that uncertainty frightened him more than anything. The next 2 days passed in tense waiting. John maintained his normal routine as much as possible, but his nerves were frayed. Every car on the road made his heart race. Every unexpected sound had him running to check on Diana. She was growing restless too, tired of hiding in the small room. He brought her books from the house, Sarah's books, ones she'd kept from her teaching days before joining the church. Diana devoured them, reading by lamplight, escaping into stories where good triumphed and children were safe. I never got to read much at home, she told him one evening. Papa said books were a waste of time, that girls only needed to know how to cook and clean. Your father is wrong about many things. John said, books are windows to other worlds. Sarah used to say that reading was the closest thing to magic we'd ever find. Sarah was your wife? Yes, she would have loved you. Diana smiled, a real smile. The first he'd seen from her. Wish I could have met her. In a way you are. Every kind thing I do, every gentle word that's Sarah living on through me. She taught me how to love unconditionally, how to see the best in people, how to fight for what's right, even when it's hard. She sounds wonderful. She was, and she would be so proud of you, Diana, of how brave you've been. On the third day, Margaret returned as promised, carrying a large bag. She spent hours with Diana, photographing the bruises, the scars, the burns on her back that made John physically ill to see. She recorded Diana's testimony on a small tape recorder, asking gentle questions that drew out the full story of abuse. Through it all, John waited outside, chopping wood he didn't need, feeding animals that weren't hungry, anything to keep his hands busy and his mind from dwelling on the horrors being documented in his barn. When Margaret finally emerged, she looked exhausted but determined. I have what I need, she said. Tomorrow I meet with Judge Thornton. If she agrees to hear the case, we can file for emergency protective custody, and if she doesn't, then we find another way. But John, you need to prepare yourself. Even if the judge rules in our favor, this will get ugly. Robert Winters won't go quietly. He'll fight, and he'll use every connection he has. Let him fight. We'll fight harder. Margaret put a hand on his arm. I believe in what we're doing. I believe we can save Diana. But I need you to promise me something. What? If this goes south, if they try to arrest you or take Diana, you'll let them. You won't do anything foolish. You won't resist. I can't promise that. John, if they try to take her back to that man, I will do whatever I must to stop it, even if it means going to jail, even if it means worse. Margaret studied his face and seemed to recognize the immovability of his position. Then let's make sure it doesn't come to that. After she left, John sat with Diana in the tack room, reading to her from one of Sarah's favorite books, a collection of poems about hope and perseverance. Mr. John, Diana asked when he finished, what happens if the judge says no? What happens if I have to go back? John closed the book, choosing his words carefully. Then we run. We'll leave Ohio, go somewhere your father can't find you. Canada, maybe, or out west. We'll start new lives, but you'd lose your farm, your home, everything. Things can be replaced, Diana. You cannot. She crawled into his lap, something she'd started doing when she needed comfort, and he held her, this child who wasn't his, but was becoming his in every way that mattered. I love you, Mr. John, she whispered. As heart swelled, I love you too, little one, and I promise, no matter what happens, I will keep you safe. It was a promise he had no right to make, a promise he might not be able to keep, but it was the truth of his heart, and he would die trying to honor it. That night, neither of them knew that across town, Robert Winters was making plans of his own. He'd hired a private investigator, someone who knew how to find people who didn't want to be found. And that investigator had just discovered something interesting about the Amish farmer, who lived on Miller's Creek Road. A man who'd lost a daughter years ago and might be desperate enough to take someone else's. The storm was coming, closer now than ever before. But in the barn, in the warm circle of lamplight, John Harrison held a little girl who'd known only cruelty, and for a moment they both felt safe. It was an illusion, fragile as ice in spring, but for now it was enough. The call came at dawn. John was in the barn, feeding the animals and checking on Diana, when he heard the phone ringing at the Yoder farm close enough that the sound carried across the frozen fields. Minutes later, he saw Jacob running toward his property, his face grave. John, Jacob called out, breathless. Margaret Fletcher just called. She says to prepare yourself. Robert Winters knows Diana is here. John's blood turned to ice. How? She didn't say, just said he's coming, probably with the police. She's on her way with Judge Thornton. She says to hold on, to not let them take Diana until she gets here. Jacob looked at John with understanding in his eyes. She also said to tell you, she's sorry, that she'll fix this. John's mind raced. Margaret had been careful, so careful. How had Winters found out? How long do we have? She said maybe an hour, maybe less. John gripped Jacob's shoulder. Thank you, friend, for everything. Jacob's eyes were sad. The elders won't like this, John. Hiding an English child, lying to the police. It goes against our ways. I know, but it was the right thing to do. Yes, Jacob said quietly. It was. God be with you, friend. As Jacob hurried away, John ran to the barn. Diana was awake, her eyes wide with fear. She'd heard Jacob's voice, sensed the urgency. He found me, didn't he? She whispered. Yes, but Margaret is coming, with a judge who can help. It won't matter. Papa always wins. John knelt before her, taking her small hands in his. Not this time. I won't let him take you. You can't stop him. No one can. Diana, listen to me. Whatever happens in the next hour, know this: you are loved. You are precious. You matter, and I will fight for you until my last breath. Tears streamed down her face. I'm scared, Mr. John. I know, I am too. But we're going to be brave together, all right? She nodded, then threw her arms around his neck. I love you, she sobbed. You're the only papa who ever really loved me. John held her tight, his own tears falling. And you're the daughter God gave me when I thought I'd never have one again. No matter what happens, that doesn't change. You understand? Nothing can change that. Max whined, sensing the tension, and pressed against them both. They didn't have long to wait. 20 minutes later, John heard cars approaching, multiple vehicles, moving fast. He positioned himself at the barn door, his heart pounding, his hands shaking. Diana was behind him, Max at her side, both of them hidden in the shadows. 3 vehicles pulled into the drive, 2 police cars and Robert Winters' battered blue sedan. John watched as Sheriff Brennan and Deputy Miller got out, followed by Robert Winters himself. The man looked worse than before, unshaven, red-eyed, his clothes rumpled, but there was something else in his expression now. Triumph. He knew she was here. Mr. Harrison, Sheriff Brennan called out, his voice heavy with disappointment. We need to talk. John stepped out into the cold morning air. About what? You know damn well about what, Robert Winters snarled, starting toward the barn. My daughter's in there. I know she is. Mr. Winters, please, the sheriff said, holding up a hand. Let me handle this. He turned to John. We have information that you've been harboring Diana Winters. A witness saw a woman leaving your property 2 nights ago. Margaret Fletcher. Mrs. Fletcher works with runaway children. It doesn't take much to put 2 and 2 together. So that was it. Someone had seen Margaret's car. In a small community, nothing stayed secret for long. I don't know what you're talking about, John said, though his voice lacked conviction. Don't lie to me, Robert shouted. That bitch Fletcher tried to get the judge on her side, but I've got friends too. They called me, told me what she was planning. My daughter is in that barn, and I want her back. Now. Your daughter ran away from you, John said, his voice steady despite his fear. Because you hurt her. That's a goddamn lie. Diana's sick in the head. Makes up stories like the burns on her back, like the bruises, like being held underwater until she nearly drowned. Robert's face went purple with rage. You don't know what you're talking about. That girl needs discipline, needs to be taught respect. She needs to be safe. Something she's never been with you. Enough, Sheriff Brennan said. Miss Harrison, I'm going to ask you one more time. Is Diana Winters on your property? John looked at the sheriff. This man he'd known for years. A decent man caught between law and justice. If she is, John said carefully, she's here because she's running for her life. Will you send her back to a man who tortures her? The sheriff's jaw tightened. The law says she belongs with her father, unless the courts determine otherwise. The law is wrong. Maybe so, but I still have to enforce it. Robert Winters pushed past the sheriff, heading for the barn. I'm getting my daughter. Try to stop me, and I'll have you arrested for kidnapping. John stepped in front of him. "You're not taking her. Get out of my way, you Amish freak." "No." Robert's fist came out of nowhere, catching John on the jaw and sending him stumbling backward. The deputy started forward to intervene, but Robert was already pushing into the barn. "Diana!" he roared. "Diana! Get out here now!" John scrambled to his feet, tasting blood, and rushed after him. Inside the barn, Robert was tearing through the stalls, knocking things over, his face twisted with fury. "I know you're here, you little brat. Come out now, or so help me." Then he saw the tack room door. A smile spread across his face, cruel and cold. He strode toward it, and John's heart nearly stopped. "Diana, open this door right now." There was silence, then a small voice. "No. I said open it. I won't go back. I won't." Robert grabbed a pitchfork leaning against the wall and used it to smash the lock. The door flew open, and there was Diana, pressed into the corner, Max in front of her, teeth bared and growling. "Call off that mutt," Robert demanded. "Max, protect," Diana whispered, and the dog lunged. Robert swung the pitchfork, catching Max across the ribs. The dog yelped and fell back, and Diana screamed, a sound of pure anguish. "Max, no!" John rushed forward, but Deputy Miller grabbed him, holding him back. Robert threw the pitchfork aside and advanced on Diana. "You've caused me so much trouble, you little witch. Do you know how much time I've wasted looking for you? How much money I've spent? I hate you!" Diana screamed. "I wish you were dead." Robert backhanded her across the face, and she crumpled. John roared, breaking free from the deputy's grasp, and threw himself at Robert Winters. They crashed to the ground, John's fist connecting with Robert's face once, twice. A lifetime of pacifism shattered in that moment. All he could see was Diana's terrified face, Max's injured body, the years of abuse this monster had inflicted. "John, stop!" Sheriff Brennan was pulling him off. "Stop it right now." But John couldn't stop. Rage burned through him like fire, righteous and consuming. He fought against the sheriff's grip, trying to get back to Robert. "You monster!" John shouted. "You evil, twisted monster! I'll kill you before I let you take her." "John!" A new voice cut through the chaos. "John, stop!" It was Margaret Fletcher, rushing into the barn with a woman in a judge's robes. Judge Thornton. Behind them were two more police officers. "What the hell is going on here?" Judge Thornton demanded, her voice sharp with authority. Everyone froze. Robert was on the ground, blood streaming from his nose. John was being held by Sheriff Brennan, still struggling. Diana was sobbing in the corner, cradling Max's head in her lap. The dog was breathing, but clearly hurt. Margaret rushed to Diana, kneeling beside her. "Sweetheart, it's okay. The judge is here. Everything's going to be okay." "He hurt Max," Diana sobbed. "He hurt my dog." Judge Thornton surveyed the scene, her expression growing harder with each detail she noticed. Diana's fresh injury, the destroyed lock, Max's wounded form, Robert Winters' violent stance. "Sheriff Brennan," she said coldly, "arrest Mr. Winters." "What?" Robert sputtered. "You can't." "I can and I will. I'm issuing an emergency protective order. Diana Winters is not to have any contact with her father until a full hearing can be conducted." "On what grounds?" Robert demanded. "That lying little—" "On the grounds that I just watched you assault a child and injure an animal. On the grounds that I've reviewed photographic evidence of severe abuse. On the grounds that I've listened to that child's testimony, and it broke my heart." Judge Thornton's voice was steel. "Sheriff, do your duty." For a moment Robert looked like he might fight. Then he seemed to realize he was surrounded, outmaneuvered. As Deputy Miller handcuffed him, he turned his rage on John. "This isn't over," he hissed. "I'll see you rot in jail for this." "Take him away," Judge Thornton ordered. As Robert was led out, still shouting threats, John sagged against the barn wall. His hands were shaking, his jaw throbbing where Robert had hit him. He'd broken his vow of non-violence. He'd raised his hand in anger, and he'd do it again in a heartbeat to protect Diana. Margaret was checking Max carefully. He needs a vet, but I think he'll be okay. The pitchfork hit his ribs. Might have cracked one or two, but he's breathing normally. I'll take him, John said immediately. There's a vet in town who helps our animals. Mr. Harrison, Judge Thornton approached him, her expression softer now. What you did was illegal. Harboring a runaway, lying to the police, assaulting Mr. Winters, these are serious charges. I know, but I'd do it all again. I believe you would. She studied him for a long moment. However, given the circumstances, and given what that child has endured, I'm not inclined to press charges. Neither, I suspect, will Mr. Winters, since doing so would only bring more attention to his abuse. John felt his knees go weak with relief, but the judge continued, we need to discuss Diana's future. She can't stay here, Mr. Harrison, not permanently. You understand that? No, Diana cried out. I want to stay with Mr. John. Please don't make me leave. Judge Thornton knelt beside her. Sweetheart, Mr. Harrison isn't family. The law requires that you be placed with relatives or in foster care, while we determine. I don't have any relatives, and foster care is just another place where nobody wants you. Diana was hysterical now, clinging to Margaret. Mr. John wants me. He loves me. Please, please don't take me away from him. John's heart shuddered. He moved to Diana's side, and she immediately transferred her grip to him, burying her face in his chest. Your Honor, Margaret said quietly, might there be another option? What if Mr. Harrison were to become Diana's foster parent? I could fast-track the approval process. He's clearly bonded with the child, and she feels safe with him. An Amish man, unmarried, fostering an English child. Judge Thornton shook her head. The state would never approve it, even if the alternative is putting her in a system where she'll be moved from home to home, never feeling safe, never trusting anyone again. Margaret's voice was passionate. Your Honor, I've been doing this for 15 years. I've never seen a bond like the one between this man and this child. He's risked everything for her. Doesn't that count for something? Judge Thornton looked at John, at Diana, clinging to him, at the fierce protection in his eyes. I need to think about this, she said finally. For now, emergency custody will go to Mrs. Fletcher. Diana will stay with her while we sort this out. No, Diana screamed. I won't go. I won't. Diana, John said gently, though his own heart was breaking. Diana, look at me. She raised her tear-stained face. This isn't forever, he said, praying it was true. This is just while the judge makes sure everything is done properly. Mrs. Fletcher will take good care of you, and I'll visit you every day if they let me. You promise? I promise. But Max will come too. I'll make sure he gets treatment, and then he'll stay with you, always. Slowly, reluctantly, Diana loosened her grip. Margaret helped her stand, keeping a protective arm around her shoulders. As they prepared to leave, Diana turned back to John. You'll fight for me? To come back? With everything I have. Judge Thornton watched this exchange, her expression unreadable. Mrs. Fletcher, a word. The two women stepped aside, speaking in low voices. John couldn't hear what was said, but he saw Judge Thornton's posture soften, saw her glance back at Diana and him. Finally, she returned. Miss Harrison, I'm ordering a full investigation into Diana's abuse claims. That investigation will include a psychological evaluation of both Diana and her father. It will also include an assessment of you as a potential guardian. The process will take weeks, possibly months. Are you prepared for that? Yes. And are you prepared for what this will do to your standing in your community? The Amish don't typically involve themselves in English legal matters. I'm prepared to do whatever it takes. Judge Thornton nodded. Then we'll reconvene in 2 weeks for a preliminary hearing. Until then, Diana stays with Mrs. Fletcher. Mr. Harrison, you may have supervised visits which Mrs. Fletcher will arrange. It wasn't ideal, but it was something. It was hope. As Margaret led Diana toward the door, the girl broke free and ran back to John, throwing her arms around him one more time. I love you, Papa, she whispered, the first time she'd called him that. John's eyes filled with tears. "I love you too, daughter. Now go with Mrs. Fletcher. Be brave. I'll see you soon." She nodded and walked away, looking back every few steps until she disappeared into Margaret's car. Max, carefully wrapped in a blanket, was loaded in with them. John stood in the barn doorway, watching the care drive away until it disappeared from sight. Sheriff Brennan approached, looking uncomfortable. "John, I'm sorry. I didn't know if I'd known what that man was doing to her. I know, Tom, you were doing your job. You did a good thing here, a brave thing." The sheriff paused. "But John, you need to prepare yourself. Robert Winters has friends, connections. Even if he goes to jail, there will be people who believe his version of events. This fight isn't over. I know, but I've got friends too, and I got the truth. That has to count for something." After the sheriff left, John stood alone in his barn, the morning sun streaming through the gaps in the walls. The tack room door hung broken, evidence of violence in a space that had been a sanctuary. Diana's blankets were still there, the books he'd brought her, the small tokens of the life they'd briefly shared. He sank down onto the hay, where he'd first laid her, that terrible night when Max had dragged her from the snow. Had it been only a week, it felt like a lifetime. "Sarah," he whispered to the wife he'd lost, "I hope I did right. I hope you'd be proud of what I've done." The barn was silent except for the soft sounds of his animals. But in that silence, John felt something not quite peace, but purpose. Whatever happened next, however this fight ended, he had done what his heart demanded. He had protected a child who needed protecting, and he would continue to fight until Diana was safe. Not hidden safe, not temporary safe, but truly, permanently, forever safe. Even if it cost him everything he had left. The June sun was warm on John's face as he stood in the barn doorway, watching Diana play in the yard with Max. The dog had healed completely, his ribs mended, and he never left Diana's side, a faithful guardian who'd proven his worth 1,000 times over. Diana was different now. Still cautious, still carrying scars that would take years to heal, but there was light in her eyes that hadn't been there before. She laughed, a real, genuine laugh that rang across the farm like church bells. "Papa," she called out, waving at him. "Come see what Max learned." "Papa," she called him that now, naturally, without hesitation. And every time she did, John's heart swelled with a love so profound it sometimes brought him to tears. The legal battle had been brutal. Robert Winters had fought viciously, hiring lawyers, dragging John's name through the mud, accusing him of kidnapping, of improper motives, of corrupting an innocent child. The Amish community had been divided, some supporting John's actions, others condemning his involvement in English affairs, but Margaret Fletcher had been relentless. She'd built a case so comprehensive, so damning, that even Robert's friends couldn't ignore it. Medical records, photographs, Diana's testimony, and finally, what sealed Robert's fate, other children coming forward. Diana hadn't been his only victim. His deceased wife's daughter from a previous marriage, now an adult, testified about similar abuse. A neighbor boy who'd been disciplined when he came to play. The truth, once unleashed, was devastating. Robert Winters was convicted of multiple counts of child abuse and assault. He would spend the next 15 years in prison. His parental rights were permanently terminated, and Judge Thornton, moved by the bond between John and Diana, had made an unprecedented decision. She'd approved John as Diana's foster parent, with a pathway to adoption. "It's highly irregular," she'd said at the hearing, "for an unmarried Amish man to adopt an English child. But this case has been irregular from the start, and I've never seen a child feel safer, more loved, than Diana does with Mr. Harrison." The adoption would be finalized next month. John walked across the yard to where Diana was demonstrating Max's new trick. The dog was balancing a biscuit on his nose, waiting for her command. "Very good," John said, smiling. "He's a smart boy." "The smartest," Diana agreed, releasing Max to catch the treat. Papa, Mrs. Order asked if we could come for dinner tonight. All the kids want to hear more stories about our trip to Columbus. They'd gone to the state fair last month, Diana's first real outing since the trial ended. She'd been nervous about the crowds, about being in public, but with John beside her and Max at her side, she'd managed. She'd even ridden the Ferris wheel, shrieking with delight as they climbed higher and higher. The Amish community had gradually come around. They saw how Diana blossomed under John's care, saw the joy she brought him. Jacob Yoder's wife Emma had taken Diana under her wing, teaching her to bake bread, to garden, to find peace in simple work. The children accepted her as one of their own. This English girl with the sad eyes who was learning to smile again. "We can go," John said, "but first I have something for you." He pulled a small package from his pocket, wrapped in simple brown paper, tied with string. Diana took it, her eyes curious. Inside was a locket, silver delicate, with a small engraving on the back. "To Diana, with love, from Papa." "Open it," John encouraged. She clicked it open. Inside were two tiny photographs. One was of John and Diana together, taken at the fair. The other was of Max, his tongue hanging out, looking directly at the camera. "So you always remember," John said softly, "that you are loved, that you belong, that you have a family." Diana's eyes filled with tears, but they were good tears, healing tears. She threw her arms around John's neck, and he held her close, this child who'd been brought to him by a dog in a snowstorm, this daughter of his heart. "I love you, Papa," she whispered. "I love you too, my brave girl, forever and always." Max barked, as if agreeing, and Diana laughed, that beautiful free sound that John lived to hear. That evening at the Yoders, Diana sat surrounded by children, telling them about the Ferris wheel, about the cotton candy, about the wonder of it all. John watched from across the room, talking quietly with Jacob. "You did a good thing, John," Jacob said. "A hard thing, but a good thing." "She saved me as much as I saved her," John replied. "When Sarah and Hannah died, I thought my life was over, that I'd never feel whole again. But Diana, she's given me purpose. She's given me joy. God works in mysterious ways." "Yes," John agreed, watching Diana laugh at something one of the Yoder children said. "He does." As they drove home that night, Diana dozed in the buggy beside him, Max at her feet. The summer stars were brilliant overhead, endless and bright. John thought about that terrible night in February, when he'd heard scratching at the barn door. How he'd almost turned the dog away, how different everything might have been. But he hadn't turned away. He'd opened the door, and in doing so, he'd opened his heart. They pulled up to the farm, and John gently woke Diana. "We're home, little one." Home. Such a simple word, but it meant everything. Diana had a home now, safety, love, a future. As they walked to the house, Diana slipped her hand into John's. "Papa?" "Yes? Do you think Mama Sarah and Hannah can see us? From heaven?" John looked up at the stars, thinking of his wife and his first daughter, forever, in his heart. "I believe they can. I hope so. I hope they know I'm taking good care of you." John's throat tightened with emotion. "They know, sweetheart, and they love you too." Inside the house, the candle still burned in the window, Sarah's tradition welcoming travelers. But tonight, as John tucked Diana into her bed, a real bed now, in a real room they'd prepared together, he thought about how that candle had welcomed the most important traveler of all, a lost little girl who'd found her way home. "Sweet dreams, Diana," he whispered, kissing her forehead. "Sweet dreams, Papa." As he descended the stairs, he heard her call out one more time, "Papa, thank you for believing me. Thank you for saving me." John paused, his hand on the banister, tears streaming down his face. "No, Diana," he whispered back. "Thank you for saving me." In the barn, the empty tack room stood as a reminder of those dark days. John had left it unchanged, except for one thing on the wall. He'd hung a small wooden sign that Diana had made in her woodworking class at school. It read simply, This is where my life began. John extinguished the lamps, locked the doors, and returned to the house where his daughter slept, safe and loved. Tomorrow would bring new challenges. There always were challenges, but they would face them together. This unlikely family, bound not by blood but by something stronger, by choice, by sacrifice, by love. Outside, the June breeze rustled through the trees, and somewhere in the distance, a dog barked. Maybe Max, maybe another guardian watching over another child in need. And in the window, the candle burned on, a beacon of hope in the darkness, welcoming all who sought shelter from the storm.